Welcome to the new season of the Live Your Spa Life show. The Spa and Spa Life stands for Seek Power Always, that divine power within you to do what you're here to do. The theme for this season is Freedom Fighter. Amazing people like you share ways to ensure your freedom, physically, financially, spiritually, and in your relationships to create a world-class life. In these times of uncertainty, it's time for you to move past the distractions and start trusting yourself more through your God-given knowingness. No one truly knows better what's best for you than you. In this season, you'll have plenty of examples of people choosing their best life and giving a voice of freedom to those who are also looking to have their best life. Thank you for sharing your precious time with us and being part of the Live Your Spa Life conversation. With us today is Robert Michael, and I am so excited because what you're going to discover is that Robert took an unlikely path. He went from working as a carpenter and musician for the first half of his career to then get his true purpose and calling as a freedom and spiritual educator in 2009. Robert, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So what's one thing that people are surprised to learn about you?
Well, a lot of things actually. But one thing would be, I guess the fact that I, started this journey as a carpenter and musician and never expected to be where I am today. So I think they're surprised to hear what I've been through and where I've been.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and you had a very impactful moment in 2009 when the housing market crashed and how this kind of rolled out and affected, your parents and your family. And that kind of started your whole journey of researching. Can you kind of take us back to that about what those initial researching looked like and what that actually prompted for you?
Yeah, so it was around 2008 when my parents started to experience the fallout, and they were looking at bankruptcy and foreclosure. After years and years of working hard, they were basically teenage parents, so they had my brother and I starting at 17, so they didn't have any formal education on how to run a business or anything, but my dad always either worked for someone or worked for himself. Once he started working for himself in his 20s, he then worked, day and night. And they had some financial troubles throughout life where they had to claim bankruptcy twice before. And this was the third time, but now it was different. They had built their life. They had everything going on, everything was good and dad was doing well. And it took a toll on them because they just couldn't understand how, two people could be honest and work hard and really achieve all these things and then just have it taken away from them overnight. So they wanted to understand what was going on. So my mom started fighting the foreclosure in court and bringing up the forensic evidence that the mortgage was fraudulent, and the court just steamrolled her, took the house and gave it to a local sheriff's deputy. So it started me wondering what's really going on too, and she started showing me all these conspiracy theory things on the internet, and I didn't believe it. But so me being who I am, I had to really dive deep because I wanted to disprove things and I couldn't. So I started researching all the things she was showing me. I started digging into congressional records, law books, statutes at large, tons of laws, history, constitutional history, everything to find out that everything was pretty much a lie. And it's really interesting how when we use our own mind to discern what we're reading rather than listening to some professor profess to us, which means lie if you look up the word profess, we start to develop this whole different view of how things actually work, and then we can implement it. So it first looked like me joining some grassroots groups and then educating myself to find out, what are these guys really talking about in these grassroots groups? And then from there, it became, well, I can't just educate myself. I have to apply this stuff. So that's basically what it looked like leading up to now. It's just a journey of research and application.
Right. Well, there's so much happening, as you know, in the world right now, and there's so much division, and people really don't know who to believe or where to look and how to look at some of these things. And especially, we hear this word like conspiracy theory gets thrown out there, and either people just wholesalely don't believe it, or it's like partial truths. And I think like anything, there is some truth in any of those, but it may take you down a path that you don't have the full truth and what that actually looks like. So one of the things that you had talked about is that there's a fallacy, a conspiracy theory, if you will, about the United States being a corporation and that they're actually a trust. And so I think the bottom line is that they're not what they seem to be, right? And that's where people start jumping on the wagon of like, something's, wrong here in Kansas. Let's kind of look and see what's going on. So can you tell help explain like what's the difference of the mindset of them being a corporation versus a trust, and how is it that they act that way and how it impacts us?
So being a corporation, which, by the way, every organization underneath of them in every state is a municipal corporation. So that's a fact. But being a for-profit corporation would change things drastically because they can hide behind certain immunities, whereas if you study the law, you start to see that a judicial duty is different than a ministerial duty. So judicially speaking, and we're not just talking about court, we're talking about the word judicial in general means that they can use discretion to, perform certain acts and stuff. They don't have to follow the letter of the law. That happens in corporate law, right? Or in corporate circumstances, like they can just say, well, I'm going to say this and do that and force this on you, and I don't have to follow anything because, this is my position and this is what I can do. In other words, law by force. And they can use their discretion where they don't have to really check the law, But if you're a trustee in a trust, that's a ministerial position. You have to follow the document, the trust document, which is the Constitution in this country. So, you have to follow that. You can't go outside the letter of the law. So when people are pointing their finger at them like they're a big corporation, I mean, you're kind of giving them a way out. You're giving them a veil to hide behind. But when you put them back in their constitutional position, which, by the way, is all a mess too, because we haven't really had a real constitutional government since 1860. But let's just, for the sake of conversation, say we did, that when you put them back in that trust position, they have to act according to trust law, which is a very honorable law structure. It's not, they don't just have this authority to use their discretion and make these judicial determinations.
Right. Well, and obviously there is a lot of profiteering and things that happen when, people are under the bubble of how they think things are happening versus what they are actually happening. But when we hear some of the numbers, you've mentioned about, one of the facts is that each person has 17.4 million. And that throws people because they're like, well, why don't I have it? Right. Or how do I have access to it? Or what changed with that? And that, I think when people hear big numbers like that, I think that's where they just blow into conspiracy theory, right? Because they can't see that that is even true or possible or how that happened. So can you explain a little bit about how we actually have that and how it gets taken away from us and how we can reclaim it?
So essentially, it's not physical money, and you can't liquidate it. You can't write a check on it. You can't just go to a bank and pull it out. It's all credit. It's all credit on account, because when we're registered at birth, they assess everybody for 20 years of labor, and then they have some mathematical calculations that they do, which usually equals out to be about 17.4 million a person to start. Okay, so what they're doing is they're assessing your labor for life, because when you're born, you have to pledge your allegiance, and a pledge is when you give something over in return for something else. So you're pledging your allegiance and your labor and your property over for the resources that the government gives you and the benefits that the government gives you. Well, again, they have to assess that and go, okay, well, they're going to pledge this as a security, which is why you get Social Security. And when you pledge that security, just like any financial law, or financial transaction, in a loan situation where the bank wants security, they're pledging you as security. So that security has to have a value. So that security is assessed at a certain number so that the value can be given over to the Federal Reserve so they can then dish out loans to the United States. And that's basically where it all starts. And that's why the birth certificates and stuff are printed on bond paper. Like, people don't even look at their certificates and see these are financial instruments. It's very clear. And we've used them several times to discharge different things like court cases. We've had members discharge mortgages with their birth certificates and car loans and credit cards and things. So we know that it's factual. And this is exactly how it operates. And the more people stick their head in their sand and call it conspiracy theory, the more you're going to see all of these problems continue, because it's all based on debt and control and nothing else.
Right. Well, and speaking of debt, you talk about, COVID as being debt collection. And, there's so much fear and energy around what's happening, as if no one can do anything. And they're also waiting for people to save them from something as well. So can you talk a little bit about how the situation, if you will, that with, the life pandemic and all of that, how this was all about debt?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, it's also about control, right? It's also about taking over humanity for the most part, but they did it through the debt mechanism. So, again, when you have, sorry, I got something in my throat. When you have countries that are not run by their governments, they're run by the banks, which they are, because the countries have no money and they can't operate unless the bank gives them a loan, and the bank is private, it's not federal. So that's who's really running the country. And when the country has defaulted on its loans and can't pay them because it has nothing to really pay their loans, you look at this as one big debt collection effort, right? It's like, oh, well, who really are the debt collectors? Well, they're the same people. Or who's the lenders? They're the same people running, big pharma, running Pfizer and all these other organizations with the vaccines. I mean, they're the same people that own all of that. If you look at, like, people have done some webs and charts of ownership of companies, and they all boil back to the same families. So it's really just a debt collection saying, hey, we're collecting. We can do whatever we want with this property. You guys pledged your property over to us. We own it. You owe us the debt. There's no money left. We're going to collect on it. We're going to do whatever we want to you. Now, from what I see, the problem they're having is they had to pull the trigger a little early, okay? Because this wasn't supposed to happen for quite a few years now. But because of everybody waking up, in my opinion, they had to pull the trigger early. So you can see that they're scrambling to get this thing to stick. They really are. And they're failing. I mean, we may look at it, oh, they're doing this to Australia, Canada, and England. And, well, yeah, those three countries specifically, because that's where a lot of the families, have all their assets and reside and everything, and they operate out of. So you look at those three countries and think it's getting really bad. But, the real tough obstacle for them is going to be the United States of America, because people just aren't having it. Now, from my understanding, this is all part of the bigger plan. So the bigger plan is that we are going to overcome that debt collection, if you will, that foreclosure, and we're going to now start forming private communities and communities that are based on governance and not government. In other words, you don't have a leader that you vote for. You vote for how the community should be run, period, and not anybody that's in charge of that, so to speak. So the debt collection is really just a catalyst for all of this stuff to happen, and they are doing it. I mean, you see they're crashing the markets and everything like that. So it really is interesting when you start looking at the debt of all of this and our obligations. I mean, we pledged allegiance. We're not supposed to be pledging allegiance to anyone but God. Whatever your God is, the supreme creator, we're not supposed to be pledging allegiance, but we did. We all did. That's what they mean by being born into original sin. Sin has nothing to do with the fact that you drank alcohol and had sex before marriage. It means that you gave your life up for commerce. You gave your life up to play this commercial game, this illusion of money and debt and power, without question. You just did it. You didn't even ask. So that's really where the whole thing originates. Right.
Well, and, to your point, part of it is that people didn't read the fine print, or they, so many things have happened year after year that there isn't a question around it. And so it's kind of like passive participants in a way, by not actually knowing what it is that how things got sidetracked and what happened. And so one of the things when you talk about that government has control over public entities, right? And I love the distinguishing thing that you're making about people becoming more private, right? As private citizens and private communities and things where we are actually claiming our sovereignty, right? We are actually creating the life that we want to live. they can't touch that stuff.
Right, because they only have authority over, that's why they call it public policy,
Right.
because that's only the public. They don't have any authority over what's private unless you give it to them. Because remember, slavery's been outlawed in every country. So how do you put people into slavery if it's been outlawed? Well, the 13th Amendment in this country says there shall be no involuntary servitude, but it says nothing about voluntary. So voluntary servitude is totally legal. So you have to keep volunteering for them to do this. And people, I didn't volunteer for that. Well, did you sign on as a U.S. citizen? Yes. Did you accept Social Security? Yes. Do you pay taxes? Yes. Do you vote? Yes. Okay. Well, you keep volunteering because all of those things are mandatory, and we've proven that over and over and over. They've even skewed the citizenship. So, which U.S. citizenship is not the right citizenship for people in America. It's supposed to be an American citizen under the state, not under the federal government. So, and that's legally, historically shown. So, yeah, what we have here are people that, their parents were tricked and their grandparents were tricked and their grandparents, and it was little by little, because these guys that mastermind this plan, this is a much higher intelligence. This is not just physical, reality. There's a higher intelligence that mastermind that plan. But the physical beings that plan, these guys plan 100 years in advance. We can't even think of that because all we think about is a plan unfolding while we're alive. But they don't care about that. They want it to unfold for their bloodlines. So they don't care if they're alive or not. They're going to start these plans and just, chip away little bits at a time. And that's how we got here.
Right. Well, and, let me know how far down the rabbit hole we can go on this, because I know that there are certain things that there's ramifications for certain conversations to have. And I know one of the things that you've talked about before is about the Khazarian Mafia and the satanic connection with all of that. I hadn't heard that name before, but I did hear about like the Bolshevism, and so I was curious to know if they are one and the same, or are they operating on different levels?
I mean, I'm technically not really an expert in that field, but I do know that a lot of these groups, yes, they do work together. Who's who in their hierarchy, I don't know. I don't have a lot of that information, but there are people out there that have done a lot of research into that. So yeah, I can't really say who's who in the mix, but I would say that, yeah, they're definitely working together,
Right.
And actually they fight too, they fight and they put us in the middle of their fights. So, and we think we're going to war for peace and all, and we're just in the middle of their little, disagreements. It said, and yeah, exactly. There was a movie, I think it was with Mel Gibson, where he was like some sort of taxi driver or something, and he actually said in the movie, and this is correct, that Vietnam was created over a bet. This was that the whole war was about two guys betting, or two, factions betting. It had nothing to do with what they claimed it was for. So they just trumped this stuff up and they use us as pawns.
Right. Well, when you start seeing like, even in things like World War II, where it was like American trucks and American parts with like Ford were used in like, German vehicles. I mean, there's so much right? There's so many things behind the scenes where you're like, what is happening right now?
Yeah, and that's why common sense, which is missing today, is so important, because you don't have to be a genius. You just have to use common sense. 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
So you add these things up and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. And that's all I basically did, was taking all this research and going, okay, well, 1 + 1 = 2. So if I do this and that, then I should get, this result. And sure enough, that's what happened.
Right.
So
I have to, so I'm a retired police officer. And so, how I was trained in a lot of things, and, how we contacted people in the public, there was never anything in our training. There was nothing that ever came up that said, people, if they didn't give you their information, because obviously you'd find out if they were wanted for a warrant, or there'd be other things that were considered the scope of our job and what it is that we were doing in order to, fight crime and to be able to do what we were supposed to do as people of the community. And so one of the things that you talk about is for people to stop giving information. And you've given several examples of when you've actually been stopped and not giving information, and that is fully within your legal right. And I'd love for you to share One, why does a citizen not have to give their information? And what is I don't even know if the word is legal, like the legal way to be able to do that, to stand as a sovereign person, because there's kind of a bit of a mind blown around that, because it's like how we think we're supposed to operate in the community, right? And how there's misuse of power in a lot of different ways. And, but then there's also, like, I never heard of any of this stuff when I was a police officer. I've been retired for many years, but of course, we weren't trained like, hey, we're going to try and trick people to blah, 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 or we're going to, you know what I mean? Like, there wasn't that happening. So, a lot of times, even when we talk about, the Vatican and, the royal families and all of those type of influences, there are people that are involved that have no idea of the bigger picture as well in that. And so I'd like to just kind of start with the, why you tell people don't give information, and how it's affecting them, and how they can kind of start getting their sovereignty back, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing, well, there's a couple things I'd like to touch on before diving into the answers, but the word sovereignty I stay away from in terms of out in the public, because FBI has labeled that as cop killing, tax evading, law breaking citizens, right? So that's called a sovereign citizen. So I don't use that word to any police or anything, because like you said, how do these guys, these guys aren't trained on this, and you're right, they're not. And very few judges really know the depth of this stuff. They know pieces. These guys know little pieces, right? So there is no law that says your private information is mandatory. All right. However, we don't know that, right? So when we're pulled over, the first thing that we have a right to do is ask for name and badge number, and leave your window down 2 inches. I'm sorry, sir, I don't know who you are. You can say you're a police officer. That's great. You have all this recording equipment, so I'm going to record you as well, because I'm concerned for my own safety. And quite honestly, I just need to know if I'm under arrest, or and if they say no, you say, well, then am I free to go? Well, no. Well, then this is an investigation, because there's no other reason for us to be on the side of this road if you're not going to be asking me questions, right? So you have me under a custodial arrest because I can't move. So I am arrested. My freedom of mobility is now in question here because I can't move. So you're going to start asking me questions. Now, if you have a license and all that, sure, that's a public contract. Here's the license. Now, I, don't get into not giving them my name, and although I have, and when I did, and I had the sheriff's, the superior officer on the phone, the lieutenant or whatever, he said, well, technically, we really don't need to see your license. Because we were going round and round. I mean, this was going on for 2 hours on the side of the road with like 5 guys at my window threatening to drag me out of the car. And I'm totally kind with them, smiling, not giving them any, just saying, look, I know, just because all these guys that drive down the road that you catch, these hundreds of guys a year have no clue what their rights are. I'm not that guy. So we're going to have to handle this a little bit differently. Oh, and they kept threatening, we're going to break the window. You can't do that until you get your superior here, because you're putting yourself in a position of liability. So get your superior. So they got him on the phone, and the guy said, yeah, you don't really need to give us your license. Actually, all we really need is your name, address, and birth date so we can make sure you're not a criminal. That's all they really need. So you can hand them the license and stuff like that. But any question after that, well, where are you coming from? Well, I'm sorry, sir, I can't give you any answers without counsel, because this is an investigation and the law says I have a right to counsel. Your Miranda rights say you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. So stop saying it, because they don't read you your Miranda rights, but that doesn't mean you don't have them. Right. The court case of Miranda versus Arizona did not give you or bestow upon you some magical right. You already have that. What that says is, oh, now the police have to remind you of it. That's all Miranda rights are, is a reminder. So you need to assert them first, which is, I have a right to remain silent without counsel. So I'm sorry, I won't be answering your questions until we get counsel here. And by the way, it doesn't say attorney. The law says counsel, not attorney. These are two different topics, two different definitions. Right. So that is everyone's right? Information, to give private information over is voluntary.
Right.
unless there's a warrant of some sort.
So what?
So
So what if, like, I'm just saying, in the stop, let's just say, the officer comes up to the window and says that, it's the typical, license and registration type thing, and someone says, no, not doing that type thing, and you just say, well, and they say, well, you're being arrested. You could say, what if you're saying, like, well, you're being detained because you rolled a stop sign, and I'm going to write you a ticket for that. How's
okay,
that
well,
work?
that's not a crime, right?
Right.
Because that's an infraction. Okay,
Right.
so are you, officer, for and on the record, are you saying I committed a crime? Yes. Okay, where's the jury? How can
Okay, so
you
you're
be the
distinguishing between a
judge?
crime and an infraction.
Well, there's that. Yeah, you can't. I mean, wait, you're going to arrest me for an infraction or a crime? Can we get this straight? And if the officer says one or the other, he's screwed because you can't be arrested for an infraction,
For sure.
right, of a contract, and you can't be arrested unless there's a crime. And to have a crime, I need. Okay, so let me ask you this, officer. You know that I had the intention to harm or injure someone because that's a crime. And
Mhm.
then you know that I did an action where I harmed or injured someone, and I'm just looking around me to see who's harmed or are you harmed or injured? I don't understand how this works here, because that's the definition, that's the elements of crime: mens rea and mens actus. Mens rea means intention, mens actus means the action. So where's the mens rea in the action? You're going to try to arrest me for blowing a stop sign? I don't understand how this works. And
Right.
by the way, officer, are you going to agree to bind the state to any liabilities? Because the minute you do something outside your corporate authority, you've just bound the state to liability. So as long as you're willing to do that, you got to do what you got to do, buddy. But I'm not answering any questions.
So
Sorry.
why did they stop
You
you?
know. Well, the last time I did this was in Kansas, and I did it just to have fun with it. They stopped me for for speeding.
Okay.
And so I said, look, I'm sorry, officer. Now, I would normally, and I've done this a million times, where I don't say I'm not going to give you any information without counsel. I do give them the license and the registration and then
Okay.
take the ticket, and then I handle it on the back end. And now if they go further and they want to know where I'm coming from or all that, because they want to try to get you with a DUI or something else, I won't answer any questions. So
Got it.
normally I just take the ticket. They don't ask any other questions. It's all good. But this
Yeah.
particular time, it's like, you know what? I understand that you guys aren't trying to get me for a crime or get me for speeding. You're just trying to get revenue, not by me paying the ticket, but by you turning that ticket into a security instrument that the court is then going to invest in bonds, and they're going to turn that into a security, invest that money, and it's all going to run through my Social Security account. And that's what you need the license and the address and all that stuff for, because you need to access that Social Security account. Well, you don't, but your accountants do back
Yeah.
behind the scenes. They're called the clerks. So no, I'm not going to give you any information because I'm going to protect that account. And as far as I see you on the side of the road, you're a pirate trying to rob that account. So when he pulled me over, I just said, look, I can't give you any information without counsel. I'm sorry. Well, sir, we need to, do you have a license? I said, yes, I do. And I went like that, and I showed it to him at the window, and I put it down. I go, well, there you go. There's my license. So you can't say I don't have a license. I just showed it to you. Now, what else do you have? Well, sir, I need to see the license. I said, I just showed it to you. What else do you need to see? What is it you're after? Right?
Mhm.
Oh, you're speeding. Well, okay, fine. And what's your point? Right? Well, this guy couldn't answer me. He just kept saying, well, I need to have your license. I need to have your, I said, I just gave you my license. I just showed it to you. What else do you need? And that's when they're like, well, we're going to break the window. And of course, 3, 4 more cops show up. And I'm like, well, before you do that, you better get your superior. So I got superior on the phone. He's going round and round with me, and he admits to me that, yes, we don't need to see the license. We just need your name, birth date, and address.
Right.
So again, those are the 3 things that tie them into creating securities based off my account. Well, not my account, but the Social Security account, and they run everything through that.
Right.
That's a federal account. I do not have any business operating that account because it's a trust. I can't operate. I'm not the trustee here. So these guys don't know this, right?
Right.
So
And I never knew
we,
this. I mean, anytime I pulled anybody over, I mean, I
no
didn't
one
do a lot
does.
of traffic work. I did, other undercover type stuff. But, it's just we, as part of the job and the scope of that, but we didn't know anything about that.
Right, which is why I had to be kind to them because they don't know this. Forgive them for they know not what they do, right? I'm forgiving
Right.
them. I'm saying, look, I get it, guys. I get it. I said, but you have to understand, I know something you don't. And because of that, we have a conflict here. That's all this is, you know. You're not under
Right.
arrest, really. Why are there spike strips under the front and back tires? And you guys are treating me like a criminal when I just swore under oath and I have a witness that I'm not a criminal and I have no criminal record. Well, we can't accept that. Well, I'm sorry. That's not my problem that your system is broken. You know, that's not my problem. So anyway, the guy gets on the phone and we go round and round, and he tries to cite some case, Terry versus Ohio, which I didn't know. I'd never read that case, so I didn't understand it. So I said, all right, well, I'm going to accept that for the time being, but I'm going to look it up. And once I did look it up, I realized he can't use that case. That case works in my favor, not his. Like, the guy didn't even know how to cite this case. Again, ignorance completely. This is the lieutenant. So they finally came and had enough, and they said, all right, well, if you got to give us your name, what's your name? I said, Robert Michael. And he said, well, is Michael your last name? I said, well, yeah, it's the last name I was given. So I'm sorry, we have a misunderstanding. No, your last name. That's the last name I was given. I don't understand what you're asking me for. He kept saying your last. I said, that is my last name. That's the last name I was given. The law book does not say I have a last name. It says I have a given and surname. Which one are you asking for? Because the law book says given and sir. It doesn't say first, middle, last. So the last name is the last name I was given, which is my middle name. Right. So then he goes, well, what's your birth date? I said, well, I was born sometime in August in the year of 1975. I don't really know the date because, honestly, I can't bear false witness to myself. I wasn't cognizant to know what the date was. And, you know, my parents, they gave me, told me what it was, but they've lied to me too. I mean, they told me Santa Claus was real. So, and Santa Claus isn't real. So I can't be a witness to that date. And they were just like, oh, that's enough. We're tired of it. Yeah, I'm like, just let you know, guys, we just have a misunderstanding. So they came and they called another lieutenant who came, and he wasn't answering any questions. He just walked right up the window, smashed it. And, they took me out of the car. Oh, yeah. Well, my girlfriend's. It wasn't even my car. It was my girlfriend's.
Wow.
And they smashed her window, and I said, you don't have to drag me out. I'll come out. I'm not fighting you guys. It's not a fight, So I said, I understand what you're doing. You have no idea what I'm doing. Clearly, you have no idea what the law actually is or how to apply it. So I'm not going to fight with you. Then they put me in cuffs. Then they search my wallet and everything. Then they read me my Miranda rights, which is completely backwards. So now I've got unlawful search and seizure, kidnapping, right? All this stuff, trespassing on the account, trespassing on that property, all kinds of stuff. So, I'm like, just racking it up. Not a problem. Let's go on down the station. We got to arrest you, so it went on. And then once I issued them my paperwork, everything stalled. Like, they didn't know what to do. So now they're like, oh, what do we do? And then it took them another month and a half to give me a follow-up court date, which is next year.
Right.
So
what what paperwork did you do?
I gave them my power of attorney and declaration of status that's recorded on the land records. So, and showing them that I am the holder in due course of this entity that you're trying to hold me accountable to, which is first, middle, and last name, which is not me. And here's the certificate that I have holder in due course rights to. So anybody getting paid on this, like the judge, the clerk, or any of their private organizations that have invested in these bonds, are going to be held liable, and you're going to have to pay me. So who's paying me? And they just, the prosecutor didn't know what to do because he's not aware of any of this. The judge, the magistrate was on vacation. So it was a judge. And when I called her out, she got real nervous. She was reading on a prompt like somebody, because she was on the screen, like somebody was telling her what to say, because she was looking at the prompt, and then she would answer me and she'd look at the prompt on her computer screen. And I caught her basically calling me a criminal before I've ever had a trial, right? Because she goes, well, you shouldn't have broke the law then. I said, well, you just made a judicial determination without any jury, so you just put yourself in a position of liability. And she's like, oh, that's it, enough, we're done here. Like, she was, because she knew that I knew more than she did, and she could not deal with that, right?
Well, and that's part of what's so broken about it, is that there's like, who's on first? Like, people don't know. You could say, oh, you're a police officer, you're a judge, you're a congressperson. It's like, who actually knows the reality of this?
They don't. They only know corporate process and procedure, right? From the municipal corporation to what they're told, but they don't actually understand law. None of them understand law. They really don't. It's sad. It's really, really bad. So when someone comes in that does know law, they go, and I've seen videos where they go to judges' trainings so that they can learn how to deal with somebody that really knows the law. But they still don't teach them anything of substance. They just tell them how to deal with this person, and that's what she was doing. And plus, they're all bonded. So their insurance company is the ruler, right? They have to go to their insurance company. Hey, can I do this? Or am I going to get in trouble? So it's this big mess of nobody knows what they're doing,
Right.
And that's
well, and it's
part
hard
of the
to
problem we
exercise
have.
your rights when people don't know how to operate, within them, right? I mean,
Yeah, to
if I would
respect
have
them.
had this information, I would have operated much differently, within the system of knowing that. But no one's taught that. No one, knows what to do with it. And we're just seeing all this, craziness that's happening out in the world and not knowing what to do differently about this. So, I mean, we could probably talk hours about this. And I know that, for one, people are going to want to stay in contact with you if you can let us know how to do that. And, do you have any kind of parting thoughts of what's kind of like the first step and what's some things that people can do to start knowing what their real rights are?
Yeah. So people can get a hold of us at houseofmarcus, markus.org, which the new website will be up this weekend. The old website was privateestatetrust.org. That's still up and running, but that will be out of commission after this weekend. So if you're looking for me between, I don't know when this airs, but when it airs and the weekend
It'll
of
be up
December
by the
11th.
time it's up.
Okay, so December 11th is when we'll be switching everything over to House of Marcus. So, and what people can do, it's really hard because there is no sign some documents and you're good. And that's what everybody's looking for. Where do I sign? How do I fix this quickly? Because that's all anybody's been taught. Right. So you really have to educate yourself. And one of the most important things to understand is that this entire system is functioning on commercial law, not constitutional, it's military law and commercial law. So if you really want to start educating yourself, those are two areas to start looking at. But definitely action steps would be make sure you have a handful of birth certificates on hand. That is your money. That is your cash, okay, if you will. That is 100% money, and that is your exemption because you're the creditor, not the bank, not the government. You're the creditor, and you have to have that certificate of title, which is really what it is, to be able to prove who you really are in the mix. And the best thing to do is get a certificate of live birth rather than a birth certificate. Okay, so a certificate of live birth is what would be considered the long form. Some states won't give you that, and it's a pain in the butt. You actually have to call them and talk to them because they're just going to try to push you to their online ordering system, which you don't really get to say exactly which certificate you're looking for. So that's first. Definitely get those on hand. And then at House of Marcus, we walk people through like what you would do with that from there and why. And that's really the most important. But I can't put a lot of that out in the public because they'll come after me because it's private stuff. So that's why we have the membership so that we can walk people through the stuff behind the private veil. But definitely get those birth certificates and stop giving information away. That's another action item. Stop answering to your name. It's not your name. You gave it up. The state owns your name. Okay, so no more first, middle, and last. You don't have that. You have a given and a family name or a surname. You don't have a first, middle, and last name. Only things that are inanimate, that aren't real, have first, middle, and last names, which is what they've done to us. They've made us inanimate slaves, essentially. And it's all fiction. Everything's legal fiction. Look the definition up, legal fiction. So these are some things people can start to think about and actually do. Stop giving information. Stop. Super
so
important.
How does that actually look different if what's on, like, let's say for instance on my live birth certificate, which I believe I have mine, it says Diane Marie Halfman. So if they now own that name, isn't that still my given name? Like, what's the difference?
No, it's not. Your given name is Diane, middle name,
Marie.
Surname. Okay, that's your given name is first and middle, and then your surname is last. What you're doing with that certificate is you're saying, I have interest in this organization that you've created with my name, because they've taken that certificate, and that's your certificate of title, just like any car. They've taken your name and they've created another you that's called a legal fiction, but it's not really you. It's just you on paper, or they attach you to it. But when you have beneficial interest in that, there's a whole set of laws that arise now because you're a beneficiary and you're not a trustee or basically a trustee operating that organization without proper authority. You're the beneficiary. So they're also using you as surety, okay, to sign off on all of these things and pay for all these quote unquote debts, traffic tickets, and things like that. Well, you're not the surety. You don't want to be the surety. But if you are the surety, you tell them, I'd like to subrogate this claim so I, the surety, can be paid on it. And that you want to see them freak out, they'll start freaking out because they know that, the subrogee is here, or the subrogor. So, these are the differences. We don't see them right away because we don't understand what these terms mean, and that's why it's so important, because you're going to start to look at everything you do and go, oh, that's a legal fiction, that's a legal fiction, that's a legal fiction. Now how do I interact with that so I'm not in a position of liability? So picture two companies doing business. How are you going to protect yourself from liability, right? Like a limited liability company or something like that. That's all you're doing when you're using your name, is you're operating a company. And if you don't understand how to protect your liability, protect yourself from liability in that company, you're really going to get stuck with it, right? With mandates and all this garbage, because that applies to your company. It doesn't apply to you. So the object is, or the idea is, how do we step back from the liability of the company, let that company take the liability, but I'm exonerated at arm's length from that. And again, that's what we constantly teach on how to learn or educate yourself to do that. It's a lot.
It is a lot. It's definitely a lot.
Yeah, we're trying to boil it down because it took me 12 years. The guys before me, it took them 30 years, right? I had a guy that came to me last week that was a member that discharged over $1 million in debt. He was singing our praises. He educated himself off of everything that we've taught, even though we didn't teach him directly. He watched all the videos. He used my templates and everything. Discharged over $1 million in debt, and he's only been studying this stuff for 5 years. So the object is, we're going to get it so people can get it real quick and start to move, while we're teaching them the certain things that we do to protect ourselves, and also set up private organizations that are protected so they can continue to function. And that's really, it's a tricky thing, but I've been working on it for 12 years and we've got it down pretty good.
Well, I love that you are having these tools for people to know where to start, because I'm sure there's some people right now, if they're not driving in their car in their home, they're probably flat on the floor going, what the hell? Right? Because even for those who are awakened in many ways, there's so many different layers to that awakening. And there's so many things that, you don't know what you don't know. And so being able to, have this awareness here, and to know what are the next steps and what are the tools and some of the things to do that. And one of the things that, we talk about here is that, the theme this year is freedom fighters, right? And in what way, what does freedom mean to you? And, in what ways that you're fighting for freedom. And one of the things you talk about is by not fighting. So for final thoughts on that.
Sure, because to fight is basically going against the war machine, okay? Everything is under war powers right now, and has been since 1860. We have not been out of a war powers, situation since the Civil War, okay? So what does war powers do? War powers allows them to apply their laws forcefully, okay, to any enemy, belligerent, or rebel, okay? So any enemy, belligerent, or rebel, they can come in and smash the rebellion. But any ally, it's no problem, right? So we want to be an ally. Hey, I'm an ally. I have a certificate here that can pay your debt, because our birth certificates, if we all took our birth certificates, everyone in this country, and filled them out for 80 grand and turned them in, we would pay the debt off overnight. It'd be done. Bam, done overnight. Because when you use a private instrument like that through your exemption, which is your Social Security account, that's the exemption account, you actually bring the public debt down. But when you pay dollar bills, that is Federal Reserve notes owned by the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve charges the United States interest to use those notes. So when you pay for something, you're not paying it, you're discharging it, and you're costing the United States more money. So their debt goes up when you use dollar bills. It doesn't go down with taxes because taxes don't go to pay for anything but war.
Right.
So when we pay them with a certificate, we bring the debt down. We're an ally. Hey, we're going to pay your debt. That's not a problem. We'll pay your debt. How much do you want? I'm an ally. I'm not here to fight with you. I'm not here to burn you at the stake. But once I tell you who I am and I declare that and you know who I am, now when you step over the line to use your war machine against a peaceful entity, we've got a major problem and you're liable. That's the difference. So when people are out there fighting, all you're doing is giving them the power and authority to shut you down, in some way, and apply more of these laws to you because you're creating a war. You're creating an emergency. Well, they say there's an emergency, but then you continue the war. We've got to stop the war. You can take the whole system down with this and this, right? Period. Very easily, like that, overnight. But that's where, like you said, like there's so many layers to the awakening. We've got to get people's consciousness to the level of how do we do this in a peaceful way, correctly. And we don't need a revolution. We need an evolution, because revolution does this. It goes around in a circle. Right. Evolution does this. Right? It goes higher. It evolves. So revolution is not a good thing, in my opinion, and I don't subscribe to it. And I don't allow any of our members to subscribe to it in the membership. They can do whatever in their own life, but in our membership, we don't talk about fighting.
I love it. I love it so much. Well, I mean, Robert, thank you so much. I mean, this is just amazing. This is, exactly the kind of conversations that people need to be looking at. There's so much, like I said, distraction and, really sidetracking people to what is really affecting their lives and what they can really affect change with. So, I know that you put on here for people to check, and they're going to get the new website when this airs. So definitely for everyone out there listening, check this out. Start really looking at, first, you said, get your live birth certificate, make that happen. Stop giving around information, reclaim back who you are actually here to be. So again, yes. Robert, thank you so much for your wisdom.
You're absolutely welcome. And if anybody wants to just view some videos, I do have a short YouTube channel. I don't have a lot up there, but that's under REM Private Management on YouTube. That's REM as in Michael, and they can see some videos and stuff there too. So thank you. And thank you. I look forward to more conversations.
Sounds good. And all the listeners out there, somebody who needs to hear this, and you probably need to hear this about 10 times and take notes with it at the same time to really start, absorbing what has been happening. What are the lies that have been going on, being able to distinguish between what's conspiracy, what's fact. These are the things that it's our responsibility to be able to look at them with critical common sense that we know is not so common anymore, and to be able to make some more powerful decisions with that. So until we connect again, live your spa life and stand in your freedom. Bye for now.